Magnus, there's going to...
I'm gonna circulate past your shares also.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Please find your seats. We're actually coming up to the actual start time of the meeting. Okay, the last person sitting gets to be scribe. Amusingly, Ecker did not immediately run for a seat. He must be volunteering. We are still missing one chair, so we may be starting a little bit later now, but please get yourself situated. So we do have a Jabber relay. Do we have anybody willing to take minutes? If not, your chairs will review the Meet Echo recording and make something up as best as we can figure that out. But if you'd like to have your own input into the minutes, please volunteer now. Jonathan, thank you so much for volunteering. At least I know the minute taker will know what all the acronyms mean. That's always nice. The blue sheets are already circulating. If you have not already seen a blue sheet, please find one as it passes you and add your name and affiliation. Some reminders. When you come up to the microphone, please remember to state your name, or at least a plausible pseudonym or alias. Please keep it professional at the mic. I realize that here in the late stages of Rtcweb with no video codecs in front of us, we're pretty much mellowed out. But please, should tempers flare, take a step back. Remember, you'll soon get to enjoy Bangkok without another working group meeting in front of you, and keep it professional at the mics. Note well, a little quiz. Please hum now if this is the first time you've seen the Note well this week.
Uh-oh, you're scribe.
Our scribe is apparently not necessarily the most honest man in the room. Can we have a spare scribe just to keep a check on Jonathan? Well, we will circulate the minutes, and if they actually note that he had not seen the Note well up until this point, we will We'll examine them very, very carefully indeed. Please do, however, remember that you, by participating either by Jabber, by Meet Echo, or here in the room, you agree to be bound by the IETF's policies as they relate to IETF, to IPR, working group process, the anti-harassment procedures, the code of conduct, our copyrights, and especially our willingness to just work together in a consensus-driven way. This is our agenda for today. Administrivia. This is the part you're in now. We have 30 minutes for AD comments on the security architecture, and IP handling drafts. We have some slides on those, but we also have the relevant AD in the room to answer questions. There'll be 20 minutes to go over the JSEP changes and 20 minutes for the MDNS candidates discussion. Is there any bashing to the agenda? Oh, go ahead. That's the next bit.
There's a button you can press that causes it to happen.
Well, you press it. Not anymore, dude. Get on up here.
So,
Press the full screen.
thanks for all the fun this working group has been. Now what's Ted playing with?
You can't fire him, he quits.
So the chairs have decided that, well, what this really called for were two presents to him. One, this nice forecast blended whiskey, which represents his presence through the buff, through the craziness of building JSEP, through a long video codec discussion, and now the mellow age of Rtcweb. We thank you very much, and we present you with this.
I look forward to consuming this along with the working WebRTC implementations that are mature and wonderful.
We're also giving him this, which is a local whiskey. I'm not kidding. It's made by the Red Bull Distillery here, and it represents our anger that you're abandoning us, you rat bastard. I would like to read you some tasting notes from this. Just a second here. The nose presents with hints of peat within a framework of juicy red apples, cherry jam, dried apricot, and soft vanilla. The whiff of new make emerges after a while, relatively acceptable, with what smells like a fair bit of higher alcohols and tails from a distilling run. On the palate, the spirit takes on a gelatinous texture, and then the flaws emerge. The acrid burn of alcohol seems very much neutral, like a cheap vodka. And that astringent bitterness lingers into the finish, with the taste of chemicals and nail polish remover. So we recommend taking our anger with you for abandoning us and regifting it, possibly to the people who built Zoomtopia and put it all over the San Jose airport. We will miss you.
So are you doing?
Perfectly summarizes about how I feel about identity.
Yeah. Ted, were you describing the whiskey or WebRTC?
The tasting notes were for the product of the Red Bull Distillery.
Ted, thank you kindly. And I do need to point out the obvious here, which is really another chair could step down as long as they did it before the last one did, but there's no way the last one gets out. So if you were smart.
Speaking of which, has anybody seen Sean?
Adam Roach is area director. I want to be clear. I am accepting no further resignations.
This will be at Scotchboff tonight if anyone wants to care to sample. Yes.
Really, if after hearing those tasting notes, you still want to sample it, Lord help you. All right, security drafts with the AD. AD, do you want to come to the microphone and chat for a moment?
I didn't know. It sounded like maybe you were going to do it. I'm happy to do this. There should be a way to get that to actually switch slides, not scroll.
I could. God.
I thought I did that.
All right.
Just putting it to full screen doesn't help.
So you probably saw my AD review on the, I don't know why it's not filling it. This is good though. On the mailing list. These slides are just sort of a summary of the points that I thought probably needed working group input, simply because it wasn't something that could be decided by fiat. They went a little bit beyond editorial. So the RTC security and IP handling drafts are ready to go. Modulo updating to ICE BIS. One of those has already been updated. I presume the other one will be fairly soon. And then the security arch document is the one that has some ambiguities that I think we need to clear up before we put it into IETF last call. So the first issue that I came across is the behavior when you have an invalid identity and initial answer. Right now the text basically just says, do what you do when you have an invalid offer. The answer to that is you reject the offer, but you can't really reject answers, not the way that most of the state machines work. So what I'm proposing here is that we adjust the language to say that the session is torn down if the identity verification in an initial answer fails. I see a thumbs up. I see no one coming up to the microphone. Going once, going twice. I think we like this answer. Issue 2. So invalid identity in an updated offer. So this is you have a session going on. Someone sends you a new offer. It has a new identity. That identity fails. Now, in theory, we have a few different options for handling this. We could reject the offer, keep the session up and going, and any of the requested changes to the session just don't happen. We could terminate the session by accepting the offer and then sending something to tear down the session, or we could explicitly leave it up to the application. My suggestion is that we just explicitly say that we're going to tear down the session under these circumstances. Something is obviously fishy going on. And under those circumstances, it's better to not have the session continue. Happy to hear arguments for any of the other two.
So Martin Thompson, is this suggestion conditional on there being pre-existing identity bound to that session, or is it unconditional?
I hadn't thought of that.
Because one of the things that we say explicitly already is that if you have identity or you have an expectation of having an identity, then this is a terminal condition. But we don't say anything about the case where you don't have identity pre-existing and you update the session and there's an attempt made to add identity.
So I don't think 515 says anything about either of those circumstances.
Right.
So there's text
There's
elsewhere.
text elsewhere in the RTC doc, maybe?
So the W3 document.
Yeah.
Okay. So we should definitely be consistent with that.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that for you briefly, and then we'll see what's going on.
All right. It would be easy if we just could say, that gives us guidance. We just replicate that into the security arch document and call it a day. Do you want to hold on this slide while you do this, or do you want me to move on?
Move on, we'll come back.
Okay. So the third issue is an invalid identity and updated answer, right? So here we've got a session going on. We send an offer. We get back an answer, has a changed identity, and that fails. I don't think there's really much choice here other than to terminate the session. We could theoretically design some pretty fancy stuff if we wanted to add more complications to JSEP. We do not want to add more complications to JSEP. So I would propose that we just make the text explicit that this terminates the session also. I see a thumbs up. Okay.
I wasn't paying attention. I got the answer to the other one. It's in the WebRTC documents.
Okay, and it says...
if identity validation fails, such blah, 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 blah. Some promise is rejected with an operation error. And there's various ways in which that connects up with the promise that was used to do the RTC set remote description or whatever function.
Okay. So that sounds like it's a reject the offer situation then.
It works for answers as well.
The what?
It works for answers as well because it's generic in that sense. It is a remote session description.
But I think he was saying it's not terminate, it's just reject.
It would be up to the
Yes.
web application to determine whether it tears the session down or just says, oh, I got a bad offer, I'm just going to send a response back.
Correct.
It seems like Martin is proposing the same processing for offer and answer in both updated and initial.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I'm just gonna, I'm making these changes as we go. So I'm planning to basically change 515 to say, invalid, if any verification fails, you handle it the same way you would handle initial offer answer.
Okay, with the initial offer answer, I guess it's you reject it, and so the session doesn't exist. In the second case, you reject it, and the session does exist unless the application tears it
And if
down.
it's an
That's
answer,
outside
then you
of our
tear it down,
purview.
then you tear down the association.
Okay, that makes sense.
So our general posture here will be to treat every single session description that we receive from a peer in the same way, whether it be an initial offer, an initial answer, or an updated one, either of those.
He's right. Functionally, I wasn't thinking it from the API perspective. From an API perspective, what happens here is that you try to set the remote description, and that's just going to fail. And at that point, it's up to the web app to figure out what to do, whether you tear down the session or try to recover or just go on.
Right, and the WebRTC specifications are structured in a way that if you fail to set a remote description, you essentially wind back to the previous state that you had, or you remain in that state. You never advance the state machine forward as a result of a failure in that attempt.
Right. Okay.
Right. So if you're in the PR answer state, then you remain there, and so on and so forth.
Chris, just one question. If you receive an updated offer without any identity at all, and you have previously provided one, is that considered an error or?
We talked about this. Sorry.
Yeah. So Krista, you and I, we talked about this one, right? And the decision that we had was that at sort of the STP description layer of things, we would say that what the application does in that context will depend on its own logic. The WebRTC specification very clearly says if you had identity and then you suddenly have none, then that's a fatal condition, and you fail to set the session description at that point, because there's no way to sort of wind back this
Identity notion.
I know who the other side is.
All right. So that was all kind of one constellation of issues that it sounds like we've nailed down pretty well. Issue 4, and I might
So just a second here, what was the conclusion on this one? So,
on all three of them is go ahead.
yeah, what's,
Essentially, it is reject the offer, but it's not quite that.
no, it's not reject the offer at all though from this
Right,
level, right?
right.
It's
I
pass
think-
it up to the application.
Yeah, I think it's 3, explicitly
Yeah.
leave it up to the application, and
We are leaving it
WebRTC
up.
as an application will do
Right.
that.
Right.
Okay, so wait, so you're,
So it is don't accept the session description.
then reject the offer.
Which reject the offer or fail setting the answer, which is
So reject
Yeah.
the offer or answer is probably, it's sort of a 1A, which is reject the offer or answer.
I think that's about right, yeah.
well, I mean,
Or ignore the offer, fail the offer or answer. Is that the right way to phrase it?
yeah. I
So
think-
maybe I'm confused here, but why answer?
So if I get an answer,
Right, so my point is, why is I think updated processing should be the same as initial processing. So that's exactly the text I have here, which is to say it's the same as initial processing. Namely, if it's an offer, you reject it. If it's an answer, you turn to the session.
so that, as I understand it, based on what Martin just said, is not consistent with the WebRTC docs.
Well, then they're wrong.
This is why I
Yes,
asked. I was
but
lost.
the problem is if you then roll back to the latest state, well, I mean, then basically everything with identity handling is different from the rest of WebRTC, right? Where like if you reject an answer or an offer, you basically stay in the last stable state. So then we would have to explain that in this case, you actually terminate the whole peer connection.
I'd allow this, John. The WebRTC documents are trying to specify the same state machine as this document, which means that we do have a synchronization problem. When the state machine is in have local offer and you receive an answer and that answer cannot be accepted, the state machine if the stuff is total garbage STP or has any other error that causes it to not parse, the state machine remains in have local offer. You have to, because, I mean, garbage has no effect.
Right, so that doesn't cause a rollback? You have to like explicitly roll back?
And no, I mean, the steps that check that the answer can be applied are applied prior to deciding to switch the state. If I remember the state machine correctly, it would be a quite new action to have errors cause transition to closed, which would be the case when you terminate the session. For consistency's sake, with every other piece of garbage that you shove into a set remote description, I would argue that if it's garbage, you do nothing.
Which that points at the leaving up to the application, basically.
Yep. I mean, the application can then see that the garbage got rejected and close the session because it doesn't know what else to do. You can imagine that it would would have some other action to take, but the garbage needs to have no effect.
Please remember to say your names.
That was it. Zanzibar Buck McFate. Well, so let's stipulate that is the correct processing. At least that's what the spec says. But then the answer to question 1, was it? Is also that you stay in the have left offer state rather than you terminate this turn of the session. So
it occurs to me, I'm thinking through this. Part of the problem is I think the fact that we're trying to use a structure based on 3264, where the 3264 handling for JSEP is up in the JavaScript application, and we can't really constrain that in this specification, right? I think what we probably want to do is take 5.1, 4, 5, 6, and 5.1, 4, and 5.1.5, collapse them into a single section that basically says, if an identity shows up that cannot be validated, the entire SDP is considered invalid, and treat it the same way as you would any other invalid SDP.
If only someone had objected to the structure last time.
Apologies for not reading it that carefully earlier.
Yeah, I don't support that. I think we have to do that. There's too many other things that break if we flip this around. So I think that is the right answer.
Okay,
So Colin Jennings, sorry.
thanks. Well, I'm glad we pushed through teasing out what was wrong there. Martin?
Martin Thompson, I just checked our implementation. We need to fix it, but we'll fix it to whatever we agree to, yeah.
All right, cool.
One of the things we do is if the target peer identity differs from the one that we get, we close the peer connection.
Okay.
It's the only time. That's the only way in which that happens. The other thing is if we validate we validate the identity in parallel to applying the remote description, and so the remote description can be applied. Yeah. So those things are minor tweaks, but we can do that.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. So issue 4, and I might be off in the weeds here, but just when I'm reading through the plain text that's in this document and what I find in 7525 and what I find in the equivalent document, the BIS document that's going through TLS right now, we seem to be a little out of sync with whether DTLS 1.0 is deprecated. Sorry?
Must, should not, and must not. I guess we have must also.
We could have may. So I'm looking to Martin and Ecker as to whether this is something that needs to be, were we just kind of lapped by the,
Yeah, we've been how long ago did we talk about this? This was like
7
5 years ago
yeah,
or
it's
something
been a
like
while.
that. When we're in the process of turning off TLS 1.0 and 1.1, this is TLS 1.1 that we're talking about right here. I would suggest that we mandate DTLS 1.2 and don't say anything about the rest of them. And maybe if you like, we can point to the deprecation thing, but everyone supports 1.2 now, and I don't see any problem with actually making that a must.
So from a reference perspective, do you believe that we absolutely have to reference the old versions deprecate, or can we just say it ourselves?
I wouldn't reference that because we're in 238 and we don't want to pull in anything more into that.
Thank you.
I think we have two options here, though I think the one that Martin proposed is correct. The first is to simply say that the first is to simply say you must do 1.2 and nothing else, as Martin suggested. The other is to say, and then assume that when blah 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 is like standardized, it can update this document. When the old versions deprecate is when the old versions deprecate is published, it can update our document. As every other document, which, like as well as every other document which cites DTLS 1.0. The other option is to independently deprecate 1.0 in this spec.
Right. So I mean, we already have an RFC out there that basically says should not, right?
Yeah.
So I think moving off of that based on that is fully kosher, right?
Yeah, sure. I guess what I'm saying is like that we could mandate no 1.0,
Right.
like ourselves without reference to this other document. Reference to the old version document, right? Or we could not mandate, or we could not forbid 1.0, and then when old versions deprecate is published, it can update this document it's like updating every other document that has like 1.0 in it. Like it basically,
really?
Yeah, there's like an enormous set of references for updating. So that will just happen on its own anyway.
Okay.
So can I ask if there's anybody in the room who would object to us making an independent statement in this document and not waiting for old versions deprecate to be published?
We have someone in the chat with you who might disagree.
Bernard, I think you're up.
Yeah. So here is my concern. There was a certain extremely large user of WebRTC that forked the webrtc.org build years ago and has been operating with DTLS 1.0. While it's true that all browsers implement 1.2 and will be going forward to 1.3, unfortunately there are forked versions of builds that are very old, and my concern would be that this would effectively turn off that large the world's largest provider of WebRTC on services. I think people know who I'm talking about. I don't want to mention the name. Now that some might consider that to be a good thing, but I just want to put that out there. I don't know if maybe other people know whether they've upgraded to 1.2, but that wasn't the case as of last time I looked at it.
So Martin Thompson, I don't expect browsers to turn this off tomorrow. But I think this working group can create a signal like the TLS working group has and say that this is no longer considered good, and let the browsers take their own time to sort this out. And I think there's probably something that we can do to talk to certain large deployments that are using 1.0, and we can probably sort of give them a little bit of an encouragement. It's not that much code to change, and they should really change because it's not good that they are using an old version of TLS. So I think we can make the statement anyway.
The deprecated independent of the draft is currently in TLS.
Colin James from the floor. So let's not confuse two different issues, which is what's the MTI from what's deprecated, right? And from updating our MTIs, I could certainly imagine moving forward from 1.0, but given everyone's been relying on 1.0 for several, and there are several large deployments that are 1.0 based, right? Not just one. I would not just casually do that at the very last minute. Now, I wouldn't mind if it also said the MTI is 1.1, or maybe 1.2, move it forward somewhat, but make the MTI could be multiple things, right?
Well, okay.
And I'll get to the second one.
Okay, so like, but let me try to break this up into pieces. So first, I propose that we MTI 1.2. That is, we take the 1.2 MTI and the cipher speaks along with it. We MTI those.
So hold on. Is there anybody in the room who objects, or on MeetEcho, who objects to making the MTI 1.2?
Let me ask a clarifying question. Adding 1.2 from the MTI to the list is a different thing than saying the only thing on the MTI list is 1.2, right? So which did you mean?
I meant making it MTI, the MTI, and the presumption people might have other things that they already support, and making this MTI doesn't change what they already support. But I don't want anybody else going out and implementing DTLS 1.0 at this point, if they're not already supporting it, in order to be compliant with this spec. Does that make sense?
So I was trying to break this into pieces to not hit that point just yet.
Okay, what I'm trying to do is to get consensus as we go, but keep going and we'll do the
Right.
consensus.
So what I was trying to get, so like there are two, right now there's two levies. There's a must 1.0 and a should 1.2. My proposal, right now I'm just saying, does anybody object to changing the 1.2 to must? And then we can talk in a second about how we handle the must 1.0. Like, does anybody not think we should require 1.2?
Does anybody have any objection? We'll have to confirm it on the list, but I don't see an objection.
Okay, so now let's bring ourselves to the 1.0 issue. There are a number of implementations, as Colin and Bernard just said, which do 1.0. There are two things we could do. I think we obviously would like to do, so one thing we could do is we could actually discourage them from doing so in some, well, say three things. We could leave it like it is. You have to do 1.0. We could actively discourage them in some way with a should or must, and then we could just say nothing. And I guess the question, like, I think my preference would be just to say nothing, cut out that entire clause. And my question is, can Bernard and Colin live with that?
So I have a question to you about timing. When do we expect TLS old versions deprecate to emerge?
6 months, a year.
Okay, so it's significantly after when we hope this emerges. 3 months to 6 months later, if we're.
It's pretty close. Or pretty close, I think. I guess my sense is that, I mean, like let's be clear. Like, we knew at the time when we talked about this deprecate draft, we knew that, like, we were asking people to do things they weren't ready to do, and so I think that, like, I think it is significantly different to have an IETF wide statement that says we hate 1.0 than it is to sort of have this particular document forbid 1.0. And I guess what I'm trying to get from Colin and Bernard is, do they think we have to encourage people to do 1.0, or they just think we shouldn't tell them not to?
So Bernard, I think to answer, you're going to have to get back in line because we lost you.
So Colin James. No, obviously, I think we should encourage people to do 1.2, no question about it. I just feel that we have this habit of wishing people would do IPv6, so we deprecate IPv4, and it doesn't mean they're going to move from 4 to 6, right? And this is we have old codecs in here that we have for, we say we should use G711 supported in this, even though we wish people would use Opus. We have, I think on some of this stuff, we need to recognize that taking, as Bernard described it, the largest deployments of our system and making them categorically not standards compatible, no longer compliant with our specs, just takes them down the slippery slope. Why should they give a shit about our specs?
So yeah,
yeah, no, I understand that,
Colin.
but that's but I don't think we should just go and unless there's a good reason to break stuff. I think we should ask what gives us maximal compatibility. And yes, everyone should use the latest best thing. No question about that. Would be best, but I don't see a really good reason for deprecating the older ones right now.
So if we just remained silent on the point, would that be good enough?
Honestly, I don't think it really matters in the slightest what any of the specs say at this point, because what the browsers are going to implement is no longer relatively impacted by the specs, because we do stuff like this, right? So the question is, what will the browsers do? And I think that given what the large deployments are going to do, which will not be to move as quickly as the old version deprecated wishes they would move, for a bunch of good reasons, right? Which,
I mean, we're not going to debate whether
Yeah.
the TLS working group is going to change their text in this working group. So, I mean,
obviously,
that
yeah.
train's going to roll out the station. The question
Right.
is whether we're going to have any statement about whether you may, should, must implement 1.0.
It's pretty unfortunate. I guess I obviously think we should do the must on 1.2. I think it's a little bit unfortunate to be removing this right at this point in time, but maybe I can live with that.
Bernard, you're next, then Martin.
Yeah. I agree with Cullen in the sense that some of these large deployments have been very slow to update on other grounds. As an example, as far as I know, they're not even supporting ECDSA yet, which has created all kinds of complications in requiring, for example, offering both RSA and ECDSA and lots of other stuff like that. So in some ways, the statement of RFC 7525 is stronger than, in old versions, is stronger than anything any individual spec could do, basically by saying that, this whole thing is on its way out in every use. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think I probably agree with Ecker to say nothing, and let individual browser vendors decide whether they're going to pull the plug. I can say it's not an easy decision, because given how big some of these people are, if you pull the plug, you'll see large changes in browser market share immediately.
So Martin Thompson, I was going to echo what Bernard just said. We're not going to pull the plug immediately on this one, and it's going to take us a little bit of time before we could even consider doing that. And for the time being, I guess even the foreseeable future, we'll retain the ability to do DTLS1, just like we have the ability to do G711 and all of those other terrible things that we wish perhaps that we didn't have to, but we'll do it anyway. And we'll only pull it out at the time that we think that that's safe to do, and that'll mean very small proportion of traffic will be using it. So I don't think it's a big deal.
I mean, so as Martin says, all the browsers do measurements of like what the world looks like, and we're not going to turn this off until like it's going to not cause a problem. I feel like there are two competing values in tension here. The one competing value is that we would like to encourage people to do the thing that we'd like them to do, which is to move to 1.2. I think that, and at some level to disable 1.0, but the real thing we want to do is encourage them to do 1.2. So that is achieved by saying must do 1.2. The second value is we would like to tell people what the requirements are for interoperability, like as a plausible matter, so that it works properly. What I suggest is a slight modified variant of what I said previously, which is that we require 1.2. And we say, previous versions of the specification, effectively previous versions of the specification, previous deployments had 1.0 as a requirement. And as a practical matter, for at the time of this rating, and for maximum compatibility, you need to do like no normative text, like only just advice. You need to do 1.0 with the following cipher suite, or you're gonna have deployment problems. So I think that splits the difference between and we're not going to say you shouldn't do 1.0. That's going to come like in 6 months, but we're going to say like it's a practical matter right now. You have to do it, and if you want to be compatible, and that gives people exactly the right thing to know, which is what they need to do, but it doesn't endorse the behavior we wish they would stop.
So it sounds like we don't have any concerns in the room about updating the must implement to DTLS 1.2. And there are two proposals, both from Ecker in front of the room, about how we might proceed. And I think that they're both still valid, even though he has picked a favorite. One of them is simply say nothing. And we assume that the people who are paying attention to this will figure out very rapidly what code they need to deploy if 1.2 isn't working. The second is to put in not implementation advice so much as deployment advice that lets them know that many of these deployments occurred before adoption of RC 7525's advice had progressed. And as a result, there are still people using 1.0 and who have nothing else. So I'm going to call a quick hum. If you prefer to say nothing, please hum now.
Just a second. Do we have somebody at the mic? And we have somebody at this mic. So
It's still Bernard.
Still Bernard.
okay.
If you would prefer to say nothing, hum now. If you would prefer to give deployment advice, hum now. All right, we'll confirm it on the list, but that seemed relatively straightforward. I heard no one for the first position.
One hum on Java for and say nothing.
Okay, so not unanimous, but I still think a pretty strong rough consensus for including the implementation advice as Edgar suggests.
All right, thanks. Let's see, this one should be pretty easy because I think the answer is kind of obvious. But so the section 8.1 says that the domain portion of an identity is an IDN and points to RFC 5890. But 5890 has two different encodings. You have A labels. I have an example here of an A label, and then an example here of a U label of exactly the same name. Either of these would work, but we definitely need to be consistent because we need to know whether to escape these things when they're displayed to the user. My recommendation is the U label.
Oh, I guess mine's the A.
Okay, mine is more a matter of this seems easier to debug. It literally is just driven by if I pull a string out of like the JavaScript console, and it renders as the second thing instead of the first. That makes my life easier. But that's a pretty weak argument. So if you have a rationale for A labels, I'd love to hear it.
So the Punycode encoding does more than just an ASCII compatible encoding. It also gets rid of invalid characters and other things, where if you do the A label, you are pretty much guaranteed that it is passed through the entirety of Punycode and therefore is only p-valid characters. So I would personally suggest the A label on that basis, although I will point out that somebody can construct an A label that doesn't start from Unicode and do whatever crazy crap they want. It's just the most common that you start with the Unicode string and pass it through Punycode in order to get an A label.
Okay, trying to remember what the lineage of getting these things, because I mean, predominantly these are used for display, right? This is, we're telling the user this identity has been vouched for by this authority. And right, so that means that the only real way that this is going to be able to be, no, that's not true. Go ahead.
I've moved to the floor microphone because I'm about to opine completely as an individual. And that is, realistically, there are a bunch of things which can happen if somebody tries to construct a domain portion of an identity that do not actually result in something that can be appropriately displayed as an A label. That is, you can't actually pass it off to the domain name system and have it work, because it contains something like a zero-width space, or it has two joiners together that don't join, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that cause this to be much more painful than you'd think. It's also the case that if you're relying on inspection for the U label, we're into the realm of confusables and other bad characters pretty rapidly. And I would suggest that if you do the A label, yeah, it's ugly, but it's fairly simple to do the matching because it's always the same kind of character sequence. Now, whether you choose to do it or not, that would be my personal advice of which way I would do it myself.
Well, remember, this is something that's going to be handed to the JavaScript itself, predominantly for display to the user, right?
But if the JavaScript wants to display it after it's received it in a more human-friendly form, taking the post-Punycode and turning it back into a display form is something it has to do for any IDN domain name already.
Okay.
So Martin Thompson, I'm not entirely against what Ted suggests here, but I will note that we're just comparing these against existing domain names, that existing labels that we get from loading resources. So maybe the concern is less in that context.
I'm not going to throw myself on
Right,
a
right.
pyre over this one way or the other. If I were coding
like
it,
the
I would
suggestion.
always use A labels, but I'm not going to throw myself on the
I
pyre.
think recognizing that it doesn't matter to the extent that you can render them as U labels if you choose, then we can probably work some way by saying they are A labels. You may choose to render them as U labels when presenting in the UX and whatnot, and that would
Okay.
probably be the right way to deal with this.
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Is Bernard in the queue or has he just not been dismissed? Harold?
Harald Alderstrom, registering a slight preference for U labels, just to be contrary. I mean, A labels are a hack that we use to get around the limitations of the domain name systems. And if you want to, if you have systems that handle U labels, then we should just use that. There are lots of trouble with allowing random Unicode, including right to left labels, my favorite. But if you require that it's a U label, then you require that it's a U label anyway. So anything that is changed under IDNA processing is not a valid U label. But it's a slight preference.
Well, so keep in mind, this is going to be validated against the domain that the IDP proxy was loaded from, right? So it has to match. It has to be something that you can actually have looked up in DNS.
Yes, at the moment, you will find that browsers do interesting things with IDNs in the address bar, including I discovered that Chrome actually does paste the URL differently according to whether you select the substring from the URL or select the whole URL. So yes, there are puzzling things going on, but I think we should make U labels work, and if U labels work, we should just use them. But as I said, not a strong preference.
Bernard, you should be on.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the WebRTC identity spec, and it's disturbingly vague. It just it'll type DOM string and it says domain name.
You're welcome.
Right, and that's effectively the problem, is that that's what this document says as well. It says IDN
Right.
and points to the spec.
Is more needed?
All right, I've expressed my personal preference, but now we're going to have chair activity up at the front. So if you think you understand this problem, please put your hand up now.
You're the only person understanding.
Come on.
Ted.
Ted, do you understand this problem?
I understand enough to be afraid of it. If you understand this problem enough to be afraid of it, please raise your hand now. Oh, much greater sense of.
So,
Okay.
Now.
so Ted, as they say, if you aren't confused by quantum mechanics, you don't understand it.
So, given that we seem to have reached a point where there are a couple of people expressing mild preferences, but not a long mic line, I'm going to beg the indulgence of the room to get to a little bit more humming. If you were one of those people who raised your hand that you understand it enough to be afraid of it, and you would
I might have an alternative proposal here.
all right.
There's like an alternative dispute mechanism where we could see
No,
who in the room was willing
no.
to just have Ted pick this as
No,
the
no,
expert.
We're not going that way. It
There
takes
are other
months of
prerequisites.
prep to do that. If you would prefer, here, I'm going to flip a coin to make you happy. If it's heads, we'll do U labels first, okay? If you would prefer A labels, please hum now. If you would prefer U labels, please hum now.
It's a rough non-consensus.
I actually,
One hum from the Jabber for U label.
I did not detect one of those being a broader set of Hummers than the other.
I wish to repeat the suggestion that Ted Hardy decide.
So I do think that there's a possibility here that we actually want to go back and ask the folks who are implementing it what they currently have.
Oh,
If
I'm
they-
sure that will not actually totally help the situation.
All right, if there's anybody who has an implementation that can report right now what they have, that would be useful.
I believe it's U-labels.
Yeah, sure. Are you sure?
I'm not certain because it's been like 2-3 years since I did this. So
Well, unless you're really careful with which API you choose, you might not have noticed, right? You probably didn't test against IDNs.
I don't think I did. So we'll fix it to be whatever the working group decides. I don't think that's going to help you there, Ted.
Okay, since Harold has been at the internationalization game longer than me, I'm going to say, why don't we go with Harold's suggestion of U-labels until we get evidence from implementers that they would prefer A-labels and why.
Okay,
Does anybody
okay,
object?
Can we take a hum on that? Are people all, if you agree with that suggestion as the path forward today, please hum now. Anyone oppose? We have consensus.
Okay, so it'll be U-labels until somebody tells us otherwise and
Right.
why.
With the caveat, this is going into IETF last call. I might make a point of just highlighting this for people who have, internationalization experience.
Are you really want to cause yourself that much pain?
Well, or if we think there's a bad idea, I can pass on that. We'll talk offline. Incidentally, this is the website for the THNIC information page if you're interested. So issue 6, identity user, the identity user portion escaping. Right now, the current text says that if the username contains an @ sign, then you should escape it. Doesn't say how. It does give an example that sort of implies it's percent encoding because they replaced an @ sign with a %40. But it's not entirely clear whether that was meant to be like illustrative or prescriptive. So it's my suggestion here is in order to allow user agents to actually unescape this and display it in a reasonable fashion that we go ahead and say, yes, we specifically mean the URL percent escaping as specified in the HTTP document, cite it, and go on from there. Say you must escape you must escape %.
Martin Thompson, I thought about this a lot, unfortunately, and this is not that simple. Part of the problem that we have here is this issue of confusability. And one of the things that we have here is the ability for a particular origin or a particular domain to make assertions about the identity of individuals. And the way that we have structured this is that domain has complete control over their namespace. And if they can put an @ in that, then example.com can make an assertion about adam@nostrum.com, and that's confusing. If the @ doesn't appear, then we might be able to avoid that problem and paving the path toward backing the @ back out again and presenting it as an actual @ symbol means that you potentially create that confusion.
Okay, I understand the problem you're pointing out. It's very user hostile to have something displayed in that way.
Yeah.
This is just kind of that's the identity system that we built because
this is the compromise. Yeah.
Firefox.com knows me as adam@nostrum.com. That's my user ID.
Indeed it does. But
And if it waves Adam %40 at nostrum.com in front of some random non-technical person, the prospect they would recognize that as a useful identity, it drops significantly.
it does. And
So I think
that's it, but the Firefox and some WebEx domain or some Hangouts domain could all claim the same thing, and they would look rather confusing.
right. So in terms of that, what I would propose is that we add some guidance along the lines of making clear that the domain, it's the firefox.com is saying this is adam@nostrum.com. I think that's not a difficult semantic to convey. I may be a little naive about that, but it seems that phrasing it that way effectively, however you want to render that in the UX, would clarify things in a way that's not as hostile and wouldn't make people wonder, like, what is this gobbledygook?
I like the hostile, unfortunately, for
Sorry?
that reason. I kind of want to push people away from going adam@nostrum.com as the identity.
I missed a bit of that.
I don't want people to say that you are adam@nostrum.com. I only really want to have nostrum.com being able to say that is kind of the way that I'm coming, the angle I'm coming from there. But maybe that's not it.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a vast number of sites that operate in the other way, right? If you ask live.com what my user ID is,
Yeah, I think this is approximately the right text, though. I was wondering, perhaps, I don't know if we get you to send us a pull request with your proposed text, because I think this may be a little tricky for me to implement.
well, I'm happy to put together text for either of these options. I just need to know which one we're choosing.
I think number one.
Okay, that's not what Martin was arguing for.
Does anybody have?
I know, I'm arguing against Martin.
Okay,
Does anybody have a preference for the implementation dependent transformation? Is anybody willing to stand up and say, that's what I want? No, I think you wanted implementation dependent limitations. That's not the same as this transformation.
well, it's what it would resolve to. It would basically say you can never contain this, and if you do, munge it in some way that the browser doesn't know how to reverse, so it'll just display it like that.
But the application would know. Oh, okay,
No,
never mind.
it wouldn't, because this is displayed in browser Chrome.
I see, in browser Chrome. So let's take a hum. If you prefer normatively citing percent encoding and requiring it for both the @ sign and the percent sign, hum now. If you prefer implementation dependent transformation, hum now. Oh my.
Overwhelming consensus that we don't understand the problem, I think.
Yep, I think that the complete lack of input from the working group means that this one probably needs to go to the list and get resolved there.
Okay.
So let me just ask a slight question on this is, the thing you guys are talking about is a user interface issue way above the level of this spec. Are you sure?
No, it's what appears in the, wow. It's what appears in the wire. Wow, okay.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Okay, so well, I guess, well, Adam, why don't you, I suggest you prepare a PR for number one, and we can bike shed that in the list.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Does anyone object to that course of action?
Yeah, can't we just, can we actually just start the IETF last call and note that this is an outstanding issue when we have a pull request on it? Why, yeah, I think you can. If we have ones that we're stuck on, I think we can do that to narrow it down. Maybe we'll get some great input from somebody outside of the community and solve the problem.
I'd rather just.
I think I would really want to fix this first. I think the chances of finding someone in the IETF at large who understands this problem better than anyone in this room, and no one in this room understands this problem apparently, is pretty much nil.
So let me ask another question. What's STIR say?
What does STIR?
Does STIR mandate one way or the other? Because aligning with that would be a not bad plan.
Well, STIR doesn't have the problem of having to escape anything. You have a field that indicates your identity, and that's your identity. It's UTF-8 inside quotes instead of JSON object lead on base 64.
All right, so I think the plan for this one is, Adam, you'll generate a PR. It will go and get bashed on the list if it gets any bashing, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks. I want to make sure, say, Bernard might be asking to be in, as he keeps getting stuck at the front there.
Dismiss him and then re-press the button.
Bernard, do you have?
Bernard, if you're in line, come back, please. If not.
Yeah, if he gets in line, we can pop back to this. All right, so I think that's everything. I do plan to hold the documents until all of them have been updated for ICE, and I need the updates for this document to finish. I really want these to go into IETF last call looking as much as possible like we want them to look in the final form. And then these are all going to go into IETF last call at the same time. So I'm holding the other two documents on this one being finished.
Okay. So Martin has prepared a PR for the U-label thing. I prepared a PR for the other things. Martin, I'm going to fix his, and then you can take a look at mine. And so we should be ready. You should be the long pole in the tent in about 3 minutes.
All right, cool. I'll do this when I sit down. All right, that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Let's come back to this one at the end of the meeting. See if we can resolve this encoding thing in the next half hour.
okay, can we bring up the, I think we have to go back.
Here we go, thanks. Next one.
I did actually hope for it. Wow.
There was infinitely more hum for one of the options than the other from up here. And then that.
Then I do that, and Stephanie told me, all right, cool.
Who's running? Can you run this? It's Jason.
So Colin Jennings here, speaking as one of the co-authors, and I'll drag Ecker up regularly too. So we've got a few changes that we just wanted to review with people on some of these drafts. So one of them is across the board, all of the ICE references have been moved to point at 8445 instead of 5245. If you missed the discussion on the list on this, then you probably didn't care enough. If you've got any objections to this now, leap to the microphone. Okay, so there we go. There's been a large discussion. This app data field turned out to not be any useful. To not be of use. The W3C is removing the way it was being used. We don't need to do anything here. I think Harold's going to speak to this a little bit more.
I was just getting in line after you finished.
Okay. So we have the author of this stuff in line. What do you have, Harold?
So I have argued about this subject for a long time. I have concluded that the working group has reached a conclusion I don't agree with, but I have concluded that the working groups have definitely reached a conclusion. So my only question in this matter is, should we update the MSID draft to actually allow skipping the track ID?
Sorry, allow you. So we're now, okay, we're outside of what that spec's allowed, not just what.
So the MSID draft at the moment says that when you have a track, you put the ID in, and when you create a track from it, you take the ID from the app data field. So that would. So I would since it gives us the ability to back off if we change our minds again. I would like to say that I would like to put in a sentence that's saying, if the app data field is missing, generate a random track ID. That's all I would want to change in the MSID document.
MSID still, it's ISG approved at this point, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of consistency. And I even offer to do the work. Tempting.
Adam?
Sorry,
So the proposal from Harold is, instead of stopping to use the app data field in A equals MSID, to instead, if it is empty, to generate a random track ID.
Sorry, JSEP already, the suggested change to JSEP already does that. The only thing I want to do is to change the MSID document so that it's consistent with what JSEP is after the change. The MSID document.
Yes.
Yes.
And Harold, but the current MSID, just so clarifying for myself here, the current MSID document does allow you to have no app data in the MSID, right? It's just, it has this text about how tracks are formed.
It has this text about how you form MSID from tracks and how you form tracks from MSIDs. And both of them don't admit to the possibility of skipping the track ID. It's just a matter of looking silly.
Adam Roach, I'm a little confused. Does that bear on what this particular thing would change, or is it just trying to mitigate some of the?
Let me give you the context back into the chain. W3C had this problem with remove track, add track. So a large argument happened there. The current, summarizing the working group chair behind there, they have consensus to remove this. We've got a PR to update that in JSEP, which is trivial. It's what we're discussing here, what we thought we were discussing here. And then Harold pointed out the issue that the MSID spec is inconsistent, would also need to be changed to be consistent with all of these.
Okay, so, but the question for this room is really whether we update it in JSEP. The other document is in the RFC editor queue, and it's an MMusic document.
Right.
So he's over there. Or, no, he fled. Or,
No, he's
no,
Fleming's.
Oh,
We're going to pull one of your documents out of the queue.
okay.
You want to come up here? Oh, and Bo, but yeah, it's.
He's over there.
Oh, sorry, not Fleming.
Would you like to go to the microphone too, Bo?
Well, we got chairs, right?
Yeah, so Fleming Andreasen, co-chair of the music working group. I mean, as long as Harold is willing to do the work and I mean, the ADs are okay with that, I mean, I don't see an issue if this is what Rtcweb needs. MSID.
It would be a very similar change to this where we've just pulled it out of the queue, made a small change to it, and presumably push it through the process again.
Okay, but I think we've determined that this is not really a question for this room, but Harold will work with the MMusic chairs on making this consistent.
Well, I think it bears on the question. If we can't get people to sign off on doing it in MMusic, then we have to try to figure out what our options are.
I'm not seeing that though. I'm seeing that, presuming that the MMusic process runs to completion so that these are consistent. Is there anybody who objects to this change? Seeing none, I think we can go on to our next one.
All right, thanks. Who's our liaison to MMusic?
Given we got the ADs and the chairs here, I think we're good.
All of the chairs and ADs relevant are here. So.
So long ago, people objected to this whole bundling idea because it was going to cause all kinds of complicated stuff and we'd never figure out how to make it work. And here we are 5 years later doing exactly that. So, I mean, this PR clarifies what happens when you reject one, you need to reject the rest. There's really no way around this. It's just a clarification that pretty much needs to be in the spec, but is a definite normative change. Does anybody want to discuss this one much?
I mean, this does not match my memory of how bundle worked. My memory was that you could pick the next one on the list if you rejected the first one. For bundle only, this is true.
No, also is the answer.
Cullen is right. It does behave in this bizarre way, and we're having to explain it a little bit better in the WebRTC spec. The reason you don't remember it is it's something that everyone kind of has fallen over, and it's not that well understood, but it is what it is, unfortunately.
And what's the reason for this?
There's no. It's a little bit hard to explain, but basically I think the idea is that there's, if you rejected the offer tagged section, you kind of have to reject the entire bundle because you don't know what else to do.
I thought you just, you tagged the next one that you did take.
That's
I mean,
not what it says.
I mean, bundle
No, it
only
says-
is this property. Yes, I agree with that.
I don't claim to understand this at all and followed it. I thought Justin was presenting this today, not me, so I.
Niels Omeyer, if I reject the first section from the bundle, I think then you're in trouble. But I mean, you can definitely reject.
Yeah, but that's the offer tag one. It's the first one.
Is this what this is about? Only for that case? Because the text, on the slide here was just saying like, if you reject a section from the bundle section, you need to reject the whole.
No, it's just only the offer tag one, right? Yeah.
This is the text that on the screen. This is the only change in the PR.
Chris, sir, yes, and the reason for that is because that's the one that contains all these attributes and everything for that, yeah. So.
Yeah, and so so what Krista said, like the reason is that then you run into trouble with all your transports.
Exactly.
But well,
Because as far as I remember, the inactive or send receive is not for the whole bundle group. It's still per M line, so you can't set the whole.
Wait a second. So I'm looking at 731. It's like really long. When the answer selects the offer tagged M section, it first checks the suggested offer tagged M section. The answer must check where the M section fills the following criteria. 1, the answer will not move the M section out of the bundle group. 2, the answer will not reject the M section. And 3, the M section does not contain a 0 port value. If all the criteria are fulfilled, blah, blah, blah. If one or more of the criteria are not fulfilled, the answer must pick the next identification tag list in the offer and present from the same criteria check. So like this seems perfectly clear. You go down the list. This is 731, a bundle 253. So maybe you could pull. Maybe you could. I mean, this is just the check. I agree that 733 and 731 are not the same, but I mean, this is quite clear. Like, what does this text mean then?
Chris, I have to say I haven't read this issue on the list. I think the question, if you have multiple tagged M lines in the offer, I mean, you have multiple which are not bundle only. If you don't accept the first one, you can accept the other one because that will also have transport parameters. But the thing is, in your bundle group, if you only have one M line with transport parameters and everyone else is bundle only, in that case, if you reject the one with the transport parameters, you have to reject everything else because there are no transport parameters. But as long as there is another M line with transport parameters that you can accept, that's okay. Well, that's not what I'm saying because I don't really know what scenario here is in this issue. Is it only one M line with transport parameters and the rest is bundle only, or was it is? Do you have a GitHub? Is there an example or something? Because it's.
So I think if you go back to the GitHub issue,
I do agree that what Harold says about 733 is correct, but like the seems to be section 731 like has the opposite instructions. So like I'm extremely confused. Like I thought 733 referred to bundle only was my memory situation, but obviously it does not. I don't disagree with Harold on this point.
Go back to the issue.
Yeah, you need bundle, not JSON.
All right, so
this may need some kind of like little mini meeting as opposed to this. Like, how many more issues are there, Colin?
That's it, I think.
Oh, this is the last one?
No.
yeah, the only thing.
I mean, I mean, like, ignoring what the text says, the way the bundle is supposed to work is that for all the non-bundle only like M sections have to contain complete parameters, because otherwise, because you don't know if the other side supports bundle at all, right? And so it's clearly the case that I can simply reject bundle and take any proper subset or any subset of those M sections. That's like the whole point of bundle, right? And so, like, from that perspective, you would really think I ought to be able to like take not the first one, but take the second one and bundle the rest of them, because they have to be independently standalone. Now, if you know, obviously you cannot. Obviously, if you have a pile of M sections and one of them is bundle tagged and the rest are bundle only, you obviously must not take. You obviously have to keep the bundle tagged one, or you're screwed. But I don't understand why you would not be able, if you have two sections A, B, and C, that were independently valid, why you could not throw away A and take B and C and keep them bundled.
I think what you just said actually replicates what I think the intent was here. If you throw away the first one, where you had the offer tagged and the rest are bundle only, this is a politer PR for saying you're screwed, right? Because you have no transport parameters and no way to go forward, because you've rejected the only thing that enabled you to go forward with all of them. Now, I agree that if you were doing something where you then had other M sections that had transport parameters, then you could go forward. But that's not what this is talking about.
But I mean, perhaps, but the key distinction is bundled versus bundle only. And so if things are merely bundled, then you can accept any subset you wish. If some of them, but if they're bundle only, then I mean, like, you must, like, in order to accept the bundle group, there must be at least one M section that is not bundle only, or you are screwed. And so the problem is that this text appears to apply. This text appears not to discriminate between the cases where where there are other non-bundle only M sections versus whether there are only one non-bundle only M section. And that's the case. But I think the problem is also, I think 733 is also busted.
So Ecker, what you're saying makes complete sense to me right now, but I wonder if we should send that comment back to Thatcher wrote this, right? This proposed text, is that who
I
wrote
thought it was Taylor.
Oh, it's Taylor, okay. I guess we sort of need to get back to Taylor. What's that? You're not going to like hitting that button.
But I think we're also going to need a PR in bundle. I think this is an error in bundle as well, if I'm reading bundle correctly. I mean, it's very complicated, so we obviously all screwed this up. But like, I think it is a mistake.
So, Harald Ladeström, I was trying to read this again, and I think what the reason why 731 and 733 are consistent is that 731 is actually about how you pick which section is the offerer tagged section, which is kind of weird that the answerer picks which is the offerer tagged section. And 73 says, okay, if you picked an offerer tagged section and you're going to reject it, you're going to be sorry.
I don't know.
Okay, so just in the interest of time here, because we do have one other thing to get through here, I'm going to suggest that we have a mini meeting and try and resolve this and get a PR in by sometime late next week. But
I mean, I saw Krister nodding when I was talking, so I think Krister and I agree on what's supposed to happen, and I think it's just a matter of fixing the text so it says that. Oh, I only spent like 30 seconds reading it, so I don't want to push on that point. But I think we agree on the behavior the managers are supposed to exhibit.
Well, so if the answer is we just reject this PR and move on, and the two of you agree on that, we can try that.
No, I think we need to make sure that like everything is consistent.
Then we need somebody to go off and write what fixes this, and that's going to probably take you and Krister and maybe Taylor.
Okay.
Okay.
So Harold, would you like the last word on this topic?
Well, speaking as inhabitant of web platform tests, please write us some tests for this behavior that describe what you want to happen.
Good luck with that, because I don't know how you verify what got bundled from JavaScript later. Non-trivial.
it should do it in the order in which the transceivers were added.
Okay, so we gotta wait for it.
Okay, so at least for the moment, we believe the action item is in Krister, Ecker, and Taylor's hands to resolve this into a new PR.
There are two more that got added like yesterday.
Can we bring them up? Change 4. 84, contradictory advice on subsequent offers need to specify the ICE protocol. Subsequent offer needs to specify the ICE protocol. Implementations must indicate the UDP, TLS, RTP, SAVPF profile for each media M line that they produce in an offer. Is there a PR for this, or is it just an issue?
So I do know what's going on here, though I think this is not written quite correctly.
That would be true.
I believe the first bullet is actually the proto field, not the ICE protocol. This issue comes out of my complaining about some other document, which I can't remember what it is at this point, that, I remember BFCP. And so in BFCP, right, Adam will probably be awake here now in a second. Like they had, it was like older ICE where you're supposed to actually attempt to match the proto field to like, in subsequent offers to what you negotiated. But JSEP just like says, always use blah, 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 UDP, TLS, blah, blah, right? Okay, so Justin actually gets this right in the document, it's just that the issue's wrong. This is the conflict right here between basically, say you negotiated ICE TCP, should you shove TCP DTLS in here, or should you shove UDP RTLS? And so JS's position was like, always say the same thing. This is a meaningless field, was JS's position. And so I think that what Justin's proposing is we have to fix this wherever it is here, and then perhaps note that we're overriding SIP SDP. Because SIP SDP does require you to change the field.
My recollection, we already note that we are overriding the SRP
perhaps. But anyway, so if everyone agrees that the JSIP behavior ought to be like never change it, then we can make sure that like the spec says never change it, and I can see if we do say the SIP SDP, we're overriding it, and if we don't, I can say it. Now, one might argue we should fix in SIP SDP as well, but like I don't want to get into that at the moment. You and I were discussing, yeah. I've mostly come around to your point of view.
Does anybody wish to argue the contrary position, that instead of just repeating the same thing every time? I see no one arguing the contrary position, so Ecker, can you produce a PR to? Thank you.
Just make sure the Roman doesn't like this. All right, so I think this one's slightly clearer. I think there's issue 855 that the session ID is 2 to the 260, 2 to the 62nd, and it should be 2 to the 63rd or 2 to the 64th. And the discussion in the issue was that we should change this to be changed to 2 to the 2 to the 63rd. You guys remember this? I think there was a.
I remember this one.
Okay. There was. Kind of went back.
There was discussion
In
during the last weekend.
My comment's wrong on the bottom of the screen. So
Yeah.
Scroll further.
Yes. It says, yeah. Niels is correct. I need coffee.
So the problem is that there are two fields, the session and the version. The session is the one which should be 2 to the 63 because it never increments. It's just like a stable, unique identifier. Whereas the version is 2 to the 62 to leave it enough room so that when we renegotiate, the number can increment and does not overflow.
Okay, so
But the text in the spec seems to have copied the text relevant for the version number into the session.
can you produce a PR?
Probably.
Thank you.
Excellent. Sold for the minutes. And that is the last issue dealing with JSON. So basically what I've heard is that we've got some things that we're good and approved, but there's also one where we have to get a little mini meeting together with Christopher and Ecker to get some text to fix that one. And here comes Bernard to tell me I'm wrong. Go ahead.
I wanted to point out an issue raised by Harold West relating to an offer to receive simulcast.
Oh, right.
Harold, do you want anything to happen with that with respect to JSON?
It would be nice to delete the text in JSON that says that we can't include the information about that when we receive the text in JSON currently seems to say that when we receive an offer, that offer cannot include information about what simulcasts the offerer is going to accept. That seems a bit silly. I'd just like to remove silly.
Oh, James, I mean, I think it's further than that. I think we explicitly agreed that, MCU-controlled bridges would be able to send an offer that did that caused simulcast to happen, even though we couldn't do simulcast fully from the browser in version 1.0. Does that match your recollection, Harold? So I think this text, I don't know what this text exactly is, but it seems like it's wrong if it's there.
I know we agreed that the browser should not be required to receive simulcast or parse STP that suggested that it should be able to receive simulcast. But that's not what the text currently says.
Harold, it sounds
Adam,
like you're
you paying attention on this one?
volunteering for a PR.
Yeah.
Okay. So Harold has just volunteered to write a PR to update the text on simulcast to reflect actual reality. So now a process point. We've reached the end of these. Area director, we believe that what happens now is once these PRs are merged, we run back through a working group last call, an IETF last call, and hand it to you to figure out whether the ISG needs to process it again. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I plan to put it in front of the IASG again.
Okay, so it will go through a complete recycle of working group last call, IETF last call, ISG evaluation before returning to the RFC editor's queue.
Yes.
Everybody's aware of that. Okay.
Yep. Would you be okay with IETF last call and working group last call overlapping at the same time, or do you want those separate?
I am not personally interested in trying to optimize those 2 weeks out of the process.
Fine, thanks.
Okay.
This is not a long poll, so it's not like it's going to make a practical difference.
Okay, I believe we're up to MDNS. Sorry it has taken us a while to get here, but here we are.
All right.
Okay. Hi. Back in Montreal, we presented the idea to use MDNS to obfuscate host candidates. So just to recap, WebRTC currently by default exposes IP addresses, so host candidates for the default route, and it's being used to fingerprint users, basically to gather private IPv4 addresses. So Chrome, Firefox, and Edge do expose that, and in Safari it's not exposed, and of course it has some drawbacks in terms of connection success, connection efficiency. So that's why we ended up with trying to use MDNS instead of IP addresses. So back in Montreal, we presented the idea, and we decided then at the time to split the work in several drafts. So basically IP handling v1 is stable, is not changing anything. MDNS ICE candidates is basically just defining the technique to use MDNS, and that's what we will talk about in this presentation. And IP handling v2 in the future might actually integrate new modes, so update IP handling v1 to use the MDNS ICE techniques wherever useful. So IP handling v1, no change except to improve the description of this issue and mention the possibility that in the future something will happen, maybe new modes. Let's see. Okay, yep, that's better. So that's the spec. The Git is on GitHub, so anyone is free to file issues and so on. Okay, so the techniques is basically two parts. One is you generate candidates that might use MDNS, and the other part is to receive candidates that might also be MDNS based. So let's start with generation. So you're a nice agent, you generate a host ICE candidate. Just before going to the GS level, you ask yourself the question, should I conceal through MDNS this host candidate? There might be a good reason to not do that. For instance, you know that the IP address is public, or you know that get user media prompt is actually has been clicked by the user, so you think that privacy is gone anyway, so whatever. But maybe you think that there's still some niceties about canceling IP for MDNS. So in that case, you generate basically a UUID version for MDNS name, you register the MDNS name, and once done, you're actually exposing the host ICE candidate. In the case that, so you will not, of course, register the MDNS name for every host ICE candidate. It's only whenever useful that you will generate it. So when to use MDNS for host candidates?
Can I?
Yep.
My name is Stuart Cheshire from Apple.
Yep. Hello.
You only have to say MDNS and I appear in the meeting.
Nice.
I just had I think this is a very interesting idea. I just had a clarification question. When you talk about MDNS names, do you mean a .local host name or do you mean a service name? Because either could work and they're pros.
I mean, blah, 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 .local and blah, blah, blah is like generated randomly.
Okay, but it's the name of an address record, not the name of
Yeah,
SRE.
it's just a record, yeah. It's not a service.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish.
David Skenazy, Google. A clarifying question. What do you mean by MDNS succeeds?
That's a very good question. In fact, I don't mean anything except that maybe you realize when you generated the UUID that you don't have any interface that accepts multicast. So then you will say, whoops, sorry, so you will skip it. In general, what will happen is that you will generate the UUID, expose it, and if registration is failing for whatever reason, then that's life. And you will basically send something that is not useful. Okay, so when to use MDNS for host candidates and when not to use it. Basically, we talk about get user media, but there's also the case of public IP addresses. It's difficult to know whether an IP address is public or not, but you can use IPv4 or IPv6 stun servers for that purpose. So what can happen in practice is that no matter whether the address is public or not, if you do not know it, you actually send the MDNS candidate, it's fine. And later on, if based on stun, you actually understand that the IP address is public, then you can still send this IP address not concealed as a server reflexive candidate.
It's Omer. That makes assumptions about where your stun server is.
Yeah, definitely.
If your stun server is in the same network, it will tell you like, I don't see you as netted, and then you believe it's public?
Yeah. That's how things are happening anyway. If you have if your web application is able to know that there's a stun server in your network, it knows quite a bit about your network. So
it does not, because I press enter stun server as a DNS name. So I just send it there blindly. I have no idea where that stun server is.
True. In practice,
I would rather inspect the IP address than asking the stun server.
But
obviously that has shortcomings as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, along with this, often, yeah, I mean, you can probe every IP address inside the network at some level and try and guess the Sun server since they're often around and guess that. So,
Okay. Okay. In the typical case where we want this technique to be used, there will be no local network Sun server, but it's true that there might be. I guess that at some point.
No, I don't think that. I think the local network Sun servers are quite common actually in many deployments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So don't assume that there's none existing.
Interesting.
Christer, question of clarification. I assume that in this case, if you use this for the host candidate cannot be the default candidate. So in the C line, you're going to put the IP address of some other candidate, and assuming that the remote pair doesn't support ICE and there is no NAT, you're still going to go through stun or turn or whatever you choose as default candidates.
So in the C line, you will put whatever, like 127.0.0.1 or 0.0.0, I guess.
I don't think you can put whatever. What the spec says is that in the C line, you should put an IP address which is used if the remote pair doesn't support ICE to begin with.
Good point about the local Sun server. So it's I will file a GitHub issue. If you want to do it, that's even better. MDNS name reuse. So of course, if you're using the same MDNS name, no matter where you are, no matter what the scope of the web page is, it's even worse for fingerprinting. So we believe MDNS names should be limited in time and scope. And basically the solution we identified in the case of browser is to scope it by the origin of the web page and to limit the lifetime to the life of a web page, basically.
Shivan, I have a question. So why are you saying should be limited and not must be limited if it does actually make it like a better fingerprinting?
Well, can you repeat?
Why is it like should be limited and not a must? I think in the draft is.
In the draft, if it may be should, yeah, it should be must. The thing is that in a browser, it makes sense to be a must, but this technique might be used by something else, like you have an endpoint that actually just want to obfuscate the network topology, and that's all. And you might just want to reuse again and again the MDNS name, no matter privacy or tracking. So it's really a browser issue there.
But is the draft not concerning itself only with browsers, or is that not correct? It's broader than that.
I guess it's not only targeted for browsers in practice. Yeah.
I think we didn't put in must because we felt like if you say must be limited time and scope, it's like prescriptive but not prescriptive. And so that, oh, sorry, you run Google. So it was like must expresses like this is what you should do, and we're not actually telling what you should do. So that's why it's Taylor should.
But yeah, in terms of guideline for web browsers, I guess we could say it's must. I don't know if there are specs that in the IETF would say in case it's a browser, it's must. Otherwise, I don't know.
Okay. Ted, yes, you can say that. From a question from the floor. So I just wanted to think about the case where somebody has the same page up twice, one say incognito mode and one not. Let's say I'm going to Gmail and I'm connecting to my corporate server on one, and I use an incognito mode in a different tab in the same browser to reach Gmail to see my personal mail.
So
in this case, is the origin scope limitation enough to handle them being two different names or not?
It will be two different names. It might be just one name in the case where you're in incognito mode, and we think that we will not even provide MDNS names at all.
That makes sense. Thanks.
So, Colin Jennings, and this is just a question about my ignorance about MDNS. So I'm thinking about in networks where you have relays and wireless devices that are caching these responses and things, how quickly can you delete these names? I mean, I mean, we're claiming here where we need.
This guy will tell you.
Stuart again. So Colin was asking me privately earlier how quickly this can be done. Normally, when a device advertises a new name on the network, and you can do this with the command line tool DNS-SD on the Macs, or with Windows if you install Bonjour for Windows. When you advertise a new name, it will send 3 queries a quarter of a second apart to verify that that name is not already in use. And then if it doesn't get a reply, it will then begin using it. So that is a 3/4 of a second delay on announcing a name. And that's, sorry?
In practice, that's not what we observed, but
What have you observed in practice?
almost no delay between,
With what software?
Mac OS. But I may be wrong, but that's what we observed. So there might, yeah.
If you look at the packet trace, you'll see from typing the command, or indeed from connecting an Ethernet cable or associating with Wi-Fi, there is a random delay to start with to desynchronize devices of 0 to 250 milliseconds. And then there's 3 queries in a row, spaced 250. And after the 3rd query, it waits 250 milliseconds. And at that point, you'll see the first announcement going out, which is when it's announcing to the world, I have claimed this name.
We have a slide about connection setup latency.
Okay.
We plan to measure this. There's some potential workarounds. Another option would just be to say, hey, we think it's UUID that is automatically generated, so there should be no conflict. So we plan to actually use it and broadcast, like maybe bypass this mechanism.
So that's right. The other option is you can skip the checking for uniqueness, but you're taking a risk there, especially if you're using host names. It's unlikely, but at least in principle, anybody in this room could have picked that as their host name, and then you go and stomp all over them.
Yeah. We hope that with UUID version 4, there might be not a lot of conflicts, but that's true.
I agree. It's statistically very unlikely. The other option you could use is to use a different record type or use an SRV record, because you're not expecting anybody to SSH to this host name. You're not expecting anybody to use this as a host name in any normal context, right? You have your own software that'll do the query. So you could move all of this off into conceptually its own namespace where it can't conflict with anything else. And that was actually my earlier question. If you advertise this as a service using SRV records, you can use the service type, let's say _ICE, and then you have your own little sandbox to play in, and all the ICE services can pick their own names and announce them without probing. And the only thing you would stomp on is other ICE services. And that it neatly compartmentalizes this in a way that can't conflict with other things.
Yeah, that seems clean. So maybe we should try to study that.
I'm happy to chat with you about possibilities.
Sure.
The other question Colin asked is, how do you clean up? And the answer is, when you stop advertising a service or a host name, the machine sends out gratuitous announcements with a TTL of 0. And that's the goodbye packet that tells all the other peers, delete this now, it's gone away. So that's handled too.
So Martin Thompson, I observe that SRV will give us 2 queries unless we do the additional data thing. Is that right? If you're doing SRV, ultimately we want an A record, so you'll have to follow an extra hop, but you can bundle them together. Additional, yep. So that sounds like a pretty good suggestion. I want to go back to the question of scope and make a recommendation there. I think we want a must, and I think we want a must based on communication peer. So in the general case, we would want to have different identities for different peers. So if you think about the case where you're talking about a SIP setup that's using this, for instance, if I'm making a call to Ted or making a call to Sean, who seems to be having a nap there. Hi, Sean. I would not want those 2 people to know that I'm the same person necessarily. But
yeah, that's I guess.
And that would be the recommendation that I would start with. and then recognize that in the browser,
if it-
doing
if
that based on origin is the most
If
sensible.
it's the same web app, the web app knows your identity, so it can share it with whoever. It's only if you have two different origins, it's two different web apps, they will not be able to share it. In that case, you need to actually continue providing this separation.
But I'm going to go a little further than that, and there are two entities in this situation that you care about potentially providing unlinkability for. One is the one that's doing the signaling, which is the web application or SIP signaling servers and whatnot. The other is your communication peer, and your communication peer will see your STP. And the web app won't be able to mask your identity from your communication peers if this identity is linkable across different sessions.
I would guess this would call for an option there.
Right, that's where I'm headed. I'm sorry to say that to you.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Tim Penton.
David Skenazy, Google. Speaking as chair of the DNSSD working group, I just think that this conversation you just had with Stuart is interesting.
Yep.
And could you please post your draft on the DNSSD mailing list so people like Stuart can review it and provide useful feedback?
Okay, cool.
Tim? Hold on, Tim. I think we're going to have to. put you
So
back. We can't
since
hear
we're at candidate generation, additional points.
Yes, sorry, just coming back to the thing about scope, Tim Panton. I wanted to say that I don't see any downside to making the scope local to the peer connection instance. There's no reason why you would want it to go beyond a peer connection.
Right.
So Martin Thompson, I agree with what Tim said, and that for a browser would be the easiest way to implement this, is you just spin up a new one of these on.
So one issue is that if you have a page can start to open 10,000 of peer connections, which will create 10,000 of MDNS and flood the network. The idea that you restrict that to a page is basically you have one page, you're done with one MDNS name per page, so you're sure that you will not flood it. Of course, browsers can then try to throttle this MDNS traffic if we go from peer connection per origin.
We already have this problem with stun and turn, and those are rate limited, so I would throw them in the same rate limiting bucket on that basis. For those people doing this, do we actually have to make this advertisement? Can we simply respond to MDNS queries? Can you do you have to announce that you have a particular name, or is it just, could you just respond on query?
In principle, that could be changed. With the current APIs, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But certainly that's something we could consider, right? It's software, it can be changed if that's necessary.
Yeah, if you have an MDNS relay, I guess then the MDNS relay might actually want to cache the data that you actually provide. And if you do not provide it, then how does it work? And
I was about to say something very similar, which is the reason it announces is because of the race condition. If the query happens first and then half a second later you register it, then the gratuitous announcement goes and the query says, oh, that's the answer I was looking for. If you can ensure that you've generated the name and registered it before you pass it to the peer, then you avoid that race condition. So that's something that we could consider adding to the API.
Yeah, I guess plus one to, I heard Martin and Tim saying, like, these should be scoped to the PC. Like, I know, but like, you know.
Yeah, please file your GitHub issue.
Let me go on the counter side of that for a second. So Colin Jennings again. So I understand where you're going with the problem. So I think we should discuss the rate limiting here for a bit. The draft says it should be rate limited, but it doesn't discuss what the rate limit should be. So the rate limit for both registrations and, more importantly, probably the rate limits for queries, right? Like we have to rate limit the queries of these as well.
MDNS is talking about that. So it's taken care by the MDNS implementation, apparently.
Okay, what is it?
There is throttling. I don't remember exactly which guidelines are, but it's, yeah.
Well, I mean, if we're trying to get a call setup time here that's like, you know, sub-quarter of a second on a LAN case would be very normal. I mean, I think we need to do the analysis to figure out whether whatever rate limits we're going to put in are going to actually work. And I think that the MDS specs were probably designed with rate limits where people were not thinking about hostile drive-by pages being able to create these, and we're changing that. So I think we should just, I'm not saying there's a problem, I've just said from the beginning, we should do the analysis of this and not just assume that the analysis that was done for a very different use case than ours was correct.
That's right.
I'm worried that analysis coupled with the per peer connection one here is going to exponentially explode and just not work.
So you're right that you could have a hostile advertisement that is trying to disturb you, and it's in one origin, for instance, and you have another origin. So we could like have quotas based on things like that. We can provide guidelines, I guess, maybe.
Chris, to you, I think maybe I heard wrong, but you said that there will be a limit of one of these per page. But I mean, if you want to offer both an IPv6 and IPv4 host address, then I guess you would need two of them.
Yeah, definitely. It's we generate a name for a given IP address, and if there are two host candidates on the same page, then we would generate two MDNS names, two different MDNS names. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Martin Thompson, I realize that the MDNS rate limiting might be very different to the rate limiting that we have for things like stun, but they're analogous. Mm-hmm. And as long as they're not? No, what's wrong?
Stun isn't sent to multicast addresses. It goes across one path on the router. This trashes every single interface on the network. It's a totally different story.
Yeah, Jeroen de Borst. One of the things we wanted to allow is that the application can actually pre-allocate a number of MDNS names. Just keep a bucket of them, and then when you need them, you start using them. So rather than creating them and destroying them on every peer connection, we wanted to leave that up to the app and to see how they could optimize that.
Yep, you create a peer connection, then you already pre-register it, something like that.
I mean, random note, but we have a very similar idea already in getting a pool of like stun candidates for exactly the same reason, so you can pre-create them, so you could leverage that.
I don't see how that solves the rate limiting problem, which is like however big that pool is, I'm just going to start generating peer connections until you've exhausted the pool. So,
well, if it's limited on per page, then it's fine. You will not be able as an attacker to create thousands of pages.
Why not?
Sure, but then you're totally screwed in. Well, I don't know. Browsers should not allow you to.
I'm designing a limited per. Is it limited per origin, or is it limited per top level origin?
It's so currently in Safari implementation, it's per top origin. So per page, meaning the top level page, yeah, basically. And we are not sharing.
Yeah, but like I'll just nav, right? So here's what I'll do. I'll basically I'll register, I'll have top level domains, 1 through a billion .example.attacker.com. And what I do is I instantiate a peer connection. I pull up one .example.com, I instantiate a peer connection to get this process going. Then I set window allocation to 2 .example.com,
sure,
and I just keep going. I mean, I don't know, like maybe this is fixable, but like I feel like this is like web security is hard, and if like these are real threats, then we have to like deal with them, and that requires probably more thinking about this than I'm sort of like getting from this presentation.
Okay.
So, just want to remind everybody we got about 7 minutes before this is over, and I think there's 7 more slides.
All right. So Martin Thompson, I'm going to open an issue on the not broadcasting. I'm going to suggest that we not broadcast the name I realize that this is a change to APIs and whatnot, but I think it'll still work in that case. So that might get us away from this stressing the network thing.
No, it doesn't help at all.
Because
you're
Okay, I think we should continue this discussion in the.
So
in
please hold the
GitHub.
rest of the questions until the end of the presentation, just so we get through the end.
Okay, let's skip this one, given time. Candidate solution, you might have seen it's roughly the same. You receive a remote ICE candidate. Should it be resolved through MDNS, you just look at whether it's blah, 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 .local, then either you do the normal processing or you resolve MDNS name. If MDNS is not successful, then you skip it. Otherwise, you replace the MDNS name by the IP address and you continue the regular flow. So nothing very special there. So some points. Implementation target. There, it might not only be browsers, but all endpoints. There was one question in Montreal about multiple IPs for a single MDNS name. If we mandate to actually go through only UUID version 4 host candidate, MDNS candidate that are actually generated as per the spec, it's not an issue. In case there's more than several addresses, we prefer to pick whatever single address it is because it's the simplest way to actually tie this implementation with the other ICE implementation. So there were some issues with doing that. So I don't know whether we have time to look at this, maybe this one, for instance. So when you register an MDNS name, you will send it to the other party. The other party will resolve the MDNS name to an IP address and will send a stun check. At that point, the sender of the MDNS candidate will receive a stun check and say, oh, there's a new pre-reflexive candidate. This might actually create some issues if we actually expose that through GetStats, which is an API from WFC. So we decided to not expose pre-reflexive candidates addresses in WebRTC stats, and this would help this proposal. And in general, it's good to, as long as you do not know whether the other guy wants to expose the IP address, it should not be exposed. So that's where we went, and the working group on WFC is okay with that. Turn server IP leakage. Again, if you register an MDNS name, you send it to the other party. The other party resolve the MDNS name to an IP address, and then it will try to match this IP address to a turn server. Then it will actually need to leak this IP address to the turn server. In practice, it's not really useful because usually you do not want to tie host candidates with turn candidates. So we believe that we should just say, no, don't use a remote MDNS candidate to allocate relay candidate pairs. Just use server reflexive or other host candidates. This should have no impact on connectivity, we believe. Network interface enumeration. If you have 6 interfaces, then you might have 6 ICE candidates. It might be a fingerprinting issue. If we limit that to default root candidates, as is currently in the draft, then it's fine because browsers, websites can already identify whether you have IPv4 or IPv4, IPv6 or IPv4 and IPv6. So our proposal is at the time we validate this technique and that we go forward on it, then we will try to check whether we'll go expand this technique to non-default root MDNS candidates, and we will probably need to identify mitigations there. MDNS message flooding, interesting. I guess we can skip this one. MDNS name denial, of course, you might have an endpoint in the network that is not very cooperative. So in that case, sure, MDNS might fail. That's life. We think that it's part of using MDNS, so it's outside of the scope of this document. reduce connectivity. Yeah, this is something that is true. We want to gather experimental data. If you're going to from a world where you're using all IP addresses to using MDNS, then in some cases, like big networks, you might not be able to actually get a connectivity, or you will only get connectivity through turn, which has its own drawbacks. So we want to investigate solutions. There's this possibility to use relays. There's the possibility to say, oh, we have this IPv6 unstable addresses. Maybe it's fine in that case to expose them and just not expose IPv4.
Okay, so Tim, you're next. We're pressing the button. And if you have a question, go ahead and get in the line now because we're almost out of time.
Right. So just a quick question on .local. Is that fully standardized? Because I think I've seen my domestic router uses Fritz box.
I think Strat will go, but I think it's
name.
standardized. Yeah.
I'll be very quick. It's RFC 67, 61, 62. It's IETF standard. It's recorded in the IANA special use domain names registry. And I was going to make a comment on this, that the wording, I would not use that wording. Networks don't have to support MDNS. MDNS uses multicast. A piece of wire supports multicast. So networks may choose to block it. I mean, I would write that as network doesn't deliberately block MDNS, but by default, any Ethernet switch that supports multicast supports it.
Right.
Adam Roach, I just wanted to make an observation about the suggestion that we gather experimental data to assess how bad this issue is. This issue is predominantly going to arise in enterprise environments, and I know at least for Firefox, a lot of enterprises choose to turn off telemetry, and so they are vastly underrepresented in the data that we collect. So I'm not sure that's particularly feasible.
Yes, on the default route, I believe we actually have changed it so that it says the default route is equal to the route from where you fetch the web page. So you will not end up with like one MDNS, but you will end up with N NDMSs per where you fetch your web pages from, which usually shouldn't be that high, but who knows? The other one is the idea of the pre-warming of with like gathering MDNS names beforehand. Don't do that when you actually advertise to the network, right? Because then you're actually like making the problem worse, because then I only need to create peer connections to start flooding the network before it actually even starts gathering. So that only works if we do go down the route of like doing MDNS without advertising. I mean, only then it helps.
Conscience, I just think that we should do a bunch, this flooding analysis and the timing and that stuff, that we should figure out some of that data, since it's a sort of network safety issue, before we start experimenting on large corporate networks. You know, I mean, I know it's great to sound, let's just experiment, but this is a congestion control issue, right? And you got to treat it that way.
That's fine. There are prototypes that are available too, so we can do both in parallel. It's not like we're waiting on having prototypes.
Yeah, but I've asked for this every time this draft has been presented, and we're, what, a year now, and we've yet to see any of it. I mean, I think that we need to get that. I hope the next version has that analysis, please.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe the Google people will be able to tell you a little bit more what they're planning to do in terms of gathering.
I can give you a couple of quick bits of data. One thing, maybe I'm not understanding something, but I'm not sure why you're concerned about picking one address, because every Mac in this room has a .local host name that names all of its addresses on all of its interfaces. So you only have to pass one name to the peer that's connecting, and when it resolves it, whether it's on whatever interface it's on, it will look up. And another quick point on the announcing topic, if you create a random name and advertise it and then pass that to the peer, if it's announced by multicast on the local network, all the peers will opportunistically cache that. So by the time the peer comes to do the query, it's already in the cache, and that becomes a 0 millisecond, 0 round trip. Hey, I already have the answer. So for the people counting the milliseconds for the connection setup time, it should already be in the cache by the time the query happens.
Exactly.
Right. Last comment from you, Jeroen, and then we're going to
I just wanted to say, and there's a slide on this, we actually implemented this in Chrome. It's going to be in the Canary version today or tomorrow. It will work on Windows and Linux, and Mac is soon to follow. There's some bugs there that we ran into. So we do intend to experiment with it in-house. So.
Okay, we are 4 minutes over time, but I have one last thing to say. We would like to close this working group. So we thank everybody who's already generated the PRs we discussed today. We encourage the rest of you who signed up to produce PRs to produce them expeditiously so that we can get through. We remind you, however, that Cluster 238 is one big hairy ball of documents. So the working group will have a bit of a wait until everything emerges as RFC. But please, let's push it onto Heather's plate as fast as we can. Your chairs, both the stepping down Colin Jennings, the Sean Turner, who had to come late and leave early, and myself, thank you for your attendance, assistance, and consensus.
So I merged all the changes to security architecture except Adams, which I'm expecting him to float on the list. Is that still the correct plan? Okay, then we're good. I will merge it as instructed by chairs.
Ted, do you want to address venue for the MDNS document?
Yeah, so I think of it as an ICE document. I think it will eventually end up in MMusic, but this group definitely cares about it a good bit. So continued. Okay, so the short answer is no, because Ben wants to hit me. We'll discuss offline where it belongs, but this working group definitely cares about the result. So the working group mailing list should be kept apprised of new versions, et cetera, even if we move it.
This has been, the reason for the wanting to hit it was that ICE is in the process of shutting down.
That's what I said, MMusic.
Oh, well, okay. I thought I heard ICE or MMusic.
No.
Apparently, just my paranoid imagination.
I understand completely. My own imagination takes me that way sometimes. Thanks, everybody.